we're coming in this morning to part 2 of a series we started last week called For Your Consideration. And this entire series is geared around how we should approach not just a new year, but every day of our life. How everything that we do starts with a thought that starts in our mind and moves its way down into action. And and we talked about last week that in order for us to move in a new direction, to end up in a different place, to end up in a spot where we want to be, we ultimately have to start by reining in our thoughts. We have to be able to stop long enough to become deliberately more considerate. And we started this whole thing, okay, if that's the goal, if we're supposed to become more considerate, then what does that actually mean? Like, we've got the word in the graphic, you see it right there on your screen. The word consider is in big caps because that's the root of all of this. That's the starting point. And so last week we started off by defining the word consider as meaning that you think carefully about something, whether it's a person, a situation, whatever it is. You think carefully about something typically before you make a decision or before you put something into action. Every action we have, like we said, is started by a decision. And we said last week, and we've said it before, that every decision that we make starts in our heart. It ultimately comes from the heart. Scripture says that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. But in order for something to get to the heart, it has to start in your mind first. It comes into our mind and then transitions into that place in our heart, that place that is the core of our being. And we talked about that our heart will ultimately reflect our mind. The things that we allow into our brain, the things that we allow into our mind will seep its way into the core of who we are, and it will show up there. That's why Solomon says that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Because what we believe about things will always affect what we do. And Paul told us that we have to change our thought process. We have to change the way we think about things in order to actually become something new. He said, don't be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, allowing the new things to take hold and to take root in your brains. Now, I don't know if y'all know this about me or not. And maybe you do, but I love to play video games. I do. I love video games, and it doesn't really matter. I like pretty much all kinds of video games. I love first-person shooters. I love role-play games. I love sports games. I love fight simulators. I even love multiplayer games. The more multiplayer, the better. One of the things that we do at our house is we have 2 games that we like to play as a family on our games, and unfortunately, one person has to sit out typically, but it's Mario Kart, and Raquel's like, it's me. It's always me. I will play if Tim's not there, and they want to all play together, but it's Mario Party or Mario Kart. Mario Kart is serious, okay? Even Mario Party itself is serious. It's not a very serious game. It's luck of the draw, but it gets cutthroat in our house. We talk a lot of trash. We played the other night. Okay, so the other night we were going to play Mario Party. We were going to play Mario Party, and they unlocked a new level of it. Okay, they just released a new version of Mario Party. We've been playing it off and on for the last couple months, and they unlocked a new portion of the game where you can play as teammates 2-on-2. Nevaeh and Micah played on a team. Sophie had to play with the computer as a teammate. Now, if you're not a gamer, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You would think that the computer in a multiplayer game would be phenomenal. No. The computer player in a multiplayer game is the worst player in the game. So Sophie had to play basically against 2 people by herself. She did not win. So I got home and they're like, hey, we unlocked Team Party. And Sophie looked at me and said, do you want to play? I said, yes. I said, I will play. And so she explained what happened. I said, we got up, and Nevaeh and Micah didn't realize this. We were getting ready to walk out. I grabbed Sophie by the arm, and I pulled her close, and I said, we're going to smoke them. Because I am that competitive parent. We went inside, and we played the game, and y'all, I am here to tell you, we did not smoke them. Not even close. It was, we were doing really good until the end when they start giving out the bonus points and stuff, and then it was just done. But I am that parent that, like, I don't take it easy on my kids when I play. I will say I have gotten better when it comes to losing because I really don't like losing. But I've gotten better at the way I respond. When I was in college, I'm just going to let you know the imperfect side of me, because I know most of you think I am perfect, which could not be further from the truth. But we used to play a lot of sports games when I was in college, baseball, football, whatever, and it was not uncommon for us to have the sliding glass door on our dorm room open and a controller to go through that door off the balcony to the parking lot. We were on the second floor. It was not unusual for that to happen in our dorm room. Now, as I've gotten older, I no longer throw the remotes. I have matured. I have been known to grab them and squeeze them hard enough and like in tension, just kind of like, but I don't try to break things anymore. I don't throw them anymore. I keep my thoughts inside. I have learned, like, you know, I've gotten better. I've matured. And I want my children to have that kind of character building, you know, those types of moments. So I don't let my kids win. We play for keeps. Now, used to, when I would play against Nevaeh or Sophie or even Micah, like, I would take it kind of easy, but I would still make sure I won every time. Now, when Nevaeh and I play, it's like, all right, I got to actually play now. And even with Sophie, she's reached a point where I'm like, all right, got to really play now, especially in Mario Kart. She's like, she loves Mario Kart. She's gotten really good at Mario Kart. But here's the thing. A lot of parents would look at you and say, no, you should absolutely let your kids win. They need to know what it's like to feel like they're winning. They need to have those moments. You should let them win from time to time. And I say, absolutely not, because it's character building moments. It teaches them how to lose with grace. It teaches them how to be, like, when they do lose, they're like, okay, I'm good. I'm not angry too much. I'm in a good place, you know, thank you. And I genuinely believe that they'll appreciate it more when they do finally reach that point where they beat you as a parent, because they earned it. They endured, they worked it out. Like, Raquel and her dad used to play chess a lot. How many times did you beat your dad at chess? Never. He never beat his dad either. I don't know if you could hear her. This is the thing, like, this is going to sound kind of harsh to say, but I believe that a loving parent will not just hand you everything. They're not just going to give it to you. They're going to make you have to figure it out and work your way through it, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like, having said that, I will also be the one who looks at, okay, like, they're really getting angry right now, so let me just stop. Let's just cut it off. Let's play something that they can win. But here's the thing. Here's what I want. Here's why I say that. Because the reality is that all of us would love it if we could go back and our parents would let us win from time to time. Like, we would love to be able to look back and say, remember that time, like, I was having a really rough day, and then the very next day, like, my dad, like, he knew I needed that win. Or my mom knew that I needed that win, or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we should want that. But the reality is that when we remove struggle, when we remove trial, we don't learn anything, because it's just handed to us. We don't get anything back. When you look back on it, like if we were to say, oh yeah, I absolutely would have loved to have for my parents to just let me win from time to time. Like those of you in the room that are adults, when you look back on it now, like as an adult, not as a child, because when you're a child, you're like, just let me win one time. But now as an adult, when you look back on it, how do you actually feel about that? Do you still wish that your parents would have just let you win? Or do you look at it and go, no, I'm glad they didn't let me win? Very few people will ever look at something and say, you know, I'm glad that I really had to struggle. I'm glad that I had to push through this, because the truth is we live in a culture right now, and even a lot of us in the church, a lot of us outside the church, a lot of you watching at home right now, you're like, no. I want to live a life that is as free from struggle as possible. I want to live a life that has little to no financial pain. I want to live a life that has little to no hard times. I want to live a life that has little to no meanness sent back at me. When I say something and people just come back at me, I want as much of that to go away. I want as little to no pushback on me as possible. That's the world we live in. And even a lot of us in church. Now, we would never say, oh no, that's absolutely what I want. But when it comes to our lives as Christians, we do. We look at God and we say, God, can't you just, like, I'm a believer now. Like, this is supposed to be like none of this. And the truth is, for a lot of years in church, that's kind of the gospel that was taught. If you come to Jesus, your life will be better. And they're not wrong. But what we do is we leave out the important thing, saying that better does not mean easy. Better does not mean without struggle, does not mean without any form of uncomfortable living. And see, and that's the thing. It's not reality to think that way. And because how we respond to when those things come says a lot about us. When the hard times come, when the pushback comes, when the things that people are saying that we perceive as being mean-spirited, or when we hear something happens and all of a sudden we've got these bills or these medical bills that are lining up and things are tough, the way we respond in those moments says a lot about who we are. It says even more, not just about who we are, but whose we are. Because the way that we respond to all of those things says a lot about what we truly believe about God. So, which leads to this question. What in the world does this have to do with the series that we're in? You're talking about being considerate. You're talking about having consideration. So what does all of this have anything to do with my life, with this series, any of it? If you have your Bible, I want you to turn to the book of James real quick. Now, if you've never read the book of James, I highly recommend it. If you are a Jesus follower, notice I didn't say Christian. That's a topic for another day. If you are a Jesus follower, the book of James is a must read, okay? And we're going to start right at the very beginning of this because we need to understand who this book was written to, okay? Context in Scripture is everything. It's easy for us to read something and take it at face value and run with it without understanding everything behind it, okay? So when James is writing this book, this letter, okay? This is actually what's called an epistle. It's a letter that was being written from one of the apostles, the disciples, to a group of believers, to a group of Jews, okay? So he starts this off, he says, James, a servant of God, of the Lord, and of the Lord Jesus Christ, okay? He differentiates the two. He says, I'm a servant of God, but I'm also a servant of Jesus Christ, okay? I acknowledge that Jesus was man. I acknowledge that God is not. I acknowledge the supernatural side of Jesus because of what he did. He says this, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, what up? He says, greetings. Now here's the thing, what's the dispersion? Why in the world? Why did he use that terminology? Okay, the dispersion was a very, very specific period of time following pretty closely after Jesus was crucified and resurrected. Because once that happened, there was a very rapid explosion of people who became Jesus followers. And as a result, what ended up happening was you had a group of Jews that were driven from their homes in the lands that they lived in. They were displaced. They were dispersed across the world because of persecution. So right off the bat, James says, listen, I realize a lot of you're dealing with stuff, you are struggling, you are in the midst of something you never ever thought you would ever be in and you never wanted to be in. I don't know what it looks like. All I know is that you have been displaced, you have been forced out, and so I want to write and bring you some greetings, okay? It's the entire point of this first verse. And then he says something that seems completely out of place. Verse 2, he says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. That seems so out of place. I'm a servant of God and of Jesus Christ, and I just want to bring you greetings. Listen, where you're at, the hard struggles, the hard times, the not knowing where you're going to sleep, the not knowing if you're going to be alive tomorrow, count it all joy. There's another translation of this that's used, and they actually use the word, says consider. And it actually comes from the Greek word that's used there, hegeomai. No, I didn't sneeze. But the word hegeomai means esteem. In other words, or more accurately, consider. Consider all of these things. to be an opportunity for joy. Now, let's go back and let's look again at what we define consider as, okay? It says to think carefully about something before you make a decision. Okay? So he's literally telling them the scenario you're in, if you stop and think about it, you have two options. You can either choose joy or you can choose defeat and bitterness. You can either choose joy in the midst of everything you're going through. He says, count it all joy. Esteem it as joy. Consider it. Think about it and choose joy when you face all kinds of trials and hardships and all of these different things that you go through, all these different things, all of the different pushbacks, all of the financial hardness, all of the negative words that are coming back to you. Consider it an opportunity for joy and stand in this. But I don't feel very joyful. Like when everything in my world falls apart, when somebody calls me on the carpet, when somebody drags me, when my parents come down on top of me because I did something that they thought was wrong, but I didn't. When my spouse and I, when we're at each other's throats, I don't see that as joy. Because it doesn't feel very joyful. And see, the reason for that is because we confuse happiness and joy. We think that happiness and joy go hand in hand. You can be joyful without being happy. Okay? We talked about this during the Advent season when we lit the joy candle. I don't know if you remember this or not. Okay? We actually defined and looked at it in the Bible, and we talked about this idea that joy in the Bible actually leans into the idea of choosing an internal contentment despite your circumstances, because you full force and wholeheartedly believe that God is going to work it out according to what he wants to see happen, according to what he desires to happen in the world around you. That's not an emotional thing. That's what happens when you consider the situation that you're in. This isn't human nature. This isn't something we look at and go, yes, every time something bad happens, I choose joy. That's why James says, consider it. That's why James says, think about it. That's why James says, put your mind at work, because everything that comes into your mind makes its way to your heart, and then you act. And James isn't the only one that even touched on this. It's not human nature. Jesus even addressed this idea of considering a total circumstances. In John chapter 16, verses 32 and 33, he says, behold, or pay attention, listen up. The hour is coming, and indeed it has actually come, when you will be scattered. Isn't that what James just talked about? That's who he wrote to, the ones that were scattered, each to his own home, and you will leave me alone. Yet I'm not alone, because the Father is with me, and I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome this world. By the time James began to write his letter to the scattered Jews, Jesus had already told his disciples in his inner circle, he said, listen, the time has come where something's about to happen, and you're going to scatter. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to go back home. You're going to be dispersed away from the source of your peace, the source of your joy, the source of your hope. You're going to be scattered. And you're going to leave me alone, but I need you to understand I'm not actually alone, because my Father is with me. And I need you to understand something. In this world, you're going to face tribulation. You're going to face hard times. You're going to face struggles. You're going to face those moments where you just want to just phone it in, give up, quit, and stop. But I need you to understand something. I've already overcome the world. I've already beaten it. It says, I've already gone ahead of you. I've already walked far enough ahead of you, and I will have walked far enough ahead of you that I'm already where you're going to end up and where you're going to be. In other words, I want you to stop and consider, to think carefully about who went ahead of you. Who's already gone ahead of you? Who's already beaten you? Who's already defeated it? Paul took what Jesus said, and he breaks it down a little bit differently in Romans chapter 5, verses 3 and 5. He says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings. Rejoice is just another fancy way of saying finding joy in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, which has been given to us. Like that sounds very, very similar to what James said. James said, when you meet trials of various kind, you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So let steadfastness have its full effect. What's the full effect? Character and hope. When you lean into it, you find those things. I love all of these things together because when you choose to lean into joy, it becomes a process. It's not just a one and done. It's like, okay, I choose joy, I'm good. No, it's a hard thing to do right off the bat. The first time something comes your way and you choose to stop and look at it and go, I didn't cause this. This wasn't my fault. This is something somebody else is doing. This is something that somebody else is inflicting upon me because of their perceived whatever. I am going to sit here and I am going to stop long enough to say, God, I need you to give me an inner peace, an internal contentment, so that I don't fly off the handle and say or do something that I'll regret. That's not easy to do, especially the first time you do it. It's a process. It's something that we have to actually dive into because the more it's just like exercise. It's just like working out. It's just like when you learn a new skill at school. It's hard the first time you do it, but the more you do it, it gets easier and easier and easier. It takes practice. It takes effort to look at a scenario, look at a situation, to look at a problem and say, God, you've got this. I know you've got this. When we develop the endurance to stand and choose joy, we start to find our character being rebuilt. And we find it being rebuilt in a way that allows us to find that hope and that joy and that peace that every single one of us needs so incredibly, desperately. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 5 through 9, Paul's writing to the church in Philippi, and he says, let your reasonableness be known to everyone. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. In other words, he's close enough to reach out and touch. He's not way over there in some far off place. He's right here with you. He's close enough for you to reach out and touch. So don't be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your request be made known. In other words, everything that you do, consider the situation, consider the scenario, take it to God. Choose to go beyond where you're standing and what you're seeing and go directly to that. And he goes, well, okay, how do we get to that? Well, we talked about this last week. He says, whatever is true. Let me back up. Let me go back. So what happens when you actually consider all of those things? What happens when you start thinking about it? So when you start to consider your scenario and you choose not to be anxious but take everything to God, it says the peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard your heart. Not just your heart, but your minds. Remember we said last week, your heart will reflect your mind. What you bring into your heart or into your mind ultimately makes its way to the heart. And this is where we picked up last week. Finally, my brothers, whatever is true, honorable, just, pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. He says, what you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. And again, it leans all of these scriptures. We take them and we read over them and we stop. We don't stop long enough to say every single one of these things means that I have to stop and put thought. I have to actually consider my scenario, my circumstances, my situation. In order for me to experience the peace of God and be able to find joy in a situation, I have to stop long enough to consider what's happening. I have to start considering who's going on. We touched on, Paul starts off this whole section we just read in verse 5. He says, let your reasonableness be known. It's incredible when you stop long enough to think about what's actually happening. There's one thing I wanted to touch on here because it's if we're not careful, we miss this, okay? The word reasonableness there, okay? It's the word epiekes, Greek word. Okay, if you're ever confused about what language in the New Testament that we go back and we look at, it's the Greek. In the New Testament, by that time, Rome had taken over, so all of the languages that were being written down were primarily Greek. In the Old Testament, when you go and you start studying the languages, it's all in Hebrew and Aramaic. Okay, so here we're reading Greek words, but that doesn't change anything. It's the language that was common to the day. Okay, so they start looking. This word epikeia, and it literally means to flow from the nearness of the Lord, inviting expectancy rather than anxiety. We see the word reasonableness. Well, why are we able to be reasonable? Why are we able to be calm? Why are we able to be at peace? Because we are close to God. And we are expecting him to be who he is. When we stop long enough to consider who God is and what his track record is, it puts us in this place where we can look with joy and expectancy instead of anxiety. Because God is bigger than our circumstances. He's bigger than our situation. We find joy. He becomes the cornerstone of everything that we're looking at. Now, here's the thing. When we begin to practice joy, when we begin to make the effort to stop and consider our circumstances, and we begin to practice joy in our life, that inner contentment, it leads us to a supernatural peace. Practicing joy will always lead you to a supernatural peace because joy is not natural. If you want to understand like why we end up sometimes we say, well, I'm going to be joyful, I'm going to be joyful, and I'm going to choose to not be upset in this scenario. It's because we stop long enough to look at the scenario and we consider the wrong thing. When we find ourselves back in a place where I'm just so anxious, I'm in the same spot. Like I want to choose joy, but something happened wrong. Okay? What are you considering? Who are you considering? Because we tend to look at the people who have gone ahead of us and we look and say, okay, well, if he can do it, I can do it. If you want financial peace in your life, you say, well, Dave Ramsey did it, I can do it. You want spiritual growth in your life, we tend to look, what do? We find the heroes and the giants that we look at and say, well, they were able to accomplish what I hope to accomplish. And so we try to mimic them and copy them. And then we fall flat. And we find ourselves full of anxiety. It's because we considered the wrong person that went ahead of us. That's why Jesus said, in this world you're going to find tribulation. But take heart, because Peter's already caught more fish than all of you. So when you go back to work as fishermen and you don't catch anything, just do what Peter did. Just no. He says, you can take heart because I've already beaten all of it. I've already beaten financial hardship. He already said the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Listen, anybody that can actually beat death, in my book, is someone that you look at and go, I'm going to follow their lead. And when I say beaten death, I don't mean that like their heart stopped in the hospital and it got restarted. I'm talking about someone who was dead for 3 solid days and mummified for all intents and purposes, and was able to take off the mummification robes, get up, walk out without stinking. That's the person I'm going to look at and say, you know what? I'm going to consider the fact that that guy has already beaten everything that I'm going to face. And because I know that that guy beat it, I know I can trust him. So I'm just going to follow his lead. So let me ask you this. In your life, what do you practice? What do you put energy and effort into when things go wrong? Do you practice anxiety? Do you practice fear? Do you practice pretending like everything's okay? Do you practice religious and overly spiritual mentalities? Or do you practice finding joy in the fact that Jesus has already gone ahead of you and has paved the way? I ask that question knowing one simple fact, that every single person in this room was like, oh no, I absolutely practice joy. I absolutely practice the fact that Jesus went ahead of me. Quit fooling yourself. Because it's not human nature. human nature is for us to lean into the negative. We can practice leaning into the believing that God is going to do what he says he's going to do. We can practice that. The problem is, it's not our nature. And we are still just as much at war with our human side as we are with accepting who Jesus really is. But the reality is when things go wrong, we still lean into it. We still push in the wrong direction. You can only actually practice joy through repetition. You can only practice anything through repetition. Doing it once and saying you're good is not practicing. It takes repetition. It takes effort. It takes all of these different things. So let me ask you this, if that's the case, what do you repeatedly consider? What is it that you repeatedly allow your mind to think about? Because those things, like we said last week, the heart will reflect the mind. When you find yourself in these scenarios, what are you actually considering? Because when we start to consider everything, okay, when we start to consider it and we start practicing joy, we already said practicing joy leads to a supernatural peace. But Paul said to let our reasonableness, let our consideration be evident or known to everyone. When we practice joy, it draws people to us. It becomes evident in our circumstances, our scenarios. It makes us look different than everybody else. And when we do that, it draws people to us because when we practice joy, we find peace. We find a peace that doesn't make sense to the world around us. And in a world that is just inundated with anxiety and stress and fear, when they see someone who is at peace in their circumstances, they go, what in the world is wrong with you? And it gives us an opportunity as Christ followers to say, there's nothing wrong with me. I just know that my God is bigger than my circumstances. And because he's bigger, I choose to make him my cornerstone. When the storm rages, I choose to let him be my anchor. Guys, peace in our world is countercultural, which means that we as believers will become different. And when we become different than the world, we become more like him. And when we become more like him, it draws people in. The only way for us to be able to become that kind of different person and to find that kind of supernatural peace is to make Jesus the cornerstone of your life. And to make him that thing that you consider with every decision you make. Every aspect of your life. Some of us are in this room right now and we say, wow, that sounds great, Tim, but you have no idea what I've been going through. You're right, I don't. But I know what I've been through in the past. And every time that I chose joy, I experienced a supernatural peace that went beyond everything I could even begin to wrap my head around. Do I do it all the time? No, because I'm human. I still get stressed out. I still allow anxiety to creep in. And when I do that, eventually I wake up and go, wow, I'm not as close to Jesus as I thought I was. And I look around and go, okay, where's he at? Oh, you're right here. I thought you were over there. But you were right here the whole time. That's the beauty of Jesus. Is he's always at hand. He's always right there waiting on us. If I could say one thing to you today, it would be this. Don't let your current circumstances, situations, keep you from looking for Jesus. Because he's right there. Whether things go your way or whether they don't. Paul said that he is convinced that nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I agree. No height, no depth, either life or death itself can separate us from the love of God. And God loved us so much that he sent Jesus to experience everything that we would, to overcome it, to die on a cross, to show us how much he loved us and to help us find a hope and a peace that comes from a relationship with God that can only be had through the forgiveness of sin. If you're in this room and you're a Jesus follower, I want you to do one very simple thing for me. I don't want you to say it out loud. This is between you and God. Very simple question. Is God truly, when I say truly, I mean legitimately at its core, is God in your core, at the very depth of your faith, is he the cornerstone for you? Is he that foundation that you stand on? Or is it religion? Because there's a difference. If you're in this room and you're not a Jesus follower, I don't need you to ask that question, because if you're not a Jesus follower, there's no way that he can be your foundation, because you've not stepped into that. You've not allowed him to step into that role in your life. So my question to you is this: what is your cornerstone? Because I promise you, if that foundation is anything other than Jesus, when the storms come and the waters rise up, the foundation your house is built on will be washed away. And it will come crumbling around you, and you will look up and go, why? It's because you built your house on the wrong foundation. This morning, all I ask you to do is to consider Jesus.